And hopefully you'll enjoy the session. It's called How to Lie with Statistics. If that's not what you're expecting, then you're in the wrong place. My name is David Sigerson, and I'm a solutions consultant with Tableau based outside of the UK. I hope you've enjoyed New Orleans. I certainly have. It's been a new city for me, and I'm hoping that you'll find the topic quite intriguing today. So we'll start off with a picture. Does anybody know what this is? Well, have you seen it before? Hands up if you've ever seen this. No, okay. So this is called Peckham Rock, and it was one of the earliest pieces of art by the protest artist Banksy. Banksy is quite popular around the globe now, so maybe you've heard of him. Essentially, he put this piece of art in the British Museum in the 2005, and it stood there for 3 days before anybody noticed it was a hoax. Okay? And that's the reason I've put it up there, right? For two reasons I feel that's relevant to the talk today. The first one is that we rarely question the things around us that we see. We don't necessarily question the things that are right in front of our nose. And the second one is the subject matter, the idea of the modern caveman, which is going to be a common theme in this presentation. And by the end of this session, I hope you'll be able to spot a good hoax, or maybe at least something misleading or too good to be true. The main takeaway is broadly that. I want you guys to understand, have a good understanding of how our decision making is perhaps affected by numbers that we see and that surround us every day, and hopefully encourage you to interact even more with that data. I know we're a data conference and we talk about that, but do we really think about the numbers we see? And I want to make sure that you listen and mindfully navigate and negotiate with the figures that you're gathering on a regular basis. So who am I? I'm David Sigerson. I've been a solutions consultant, so pre-sales for Tableau for about 2.5 years. I'm originally from a place called Dudley, which is in the West Midlands in England. You've probably spotted the accent. You've probably spotted the accent isn't quite American, so you knew there was something up. There's no reason you'd know Dudley at all, apart from the fact that in the 1800s, it was like the heart of the Industrial Revolution in England. So if you think about it, it was like the Silicon Valley of like 100 years ago. So it was really good in the past, and I'm hoping, well, maybe that's the same with me. I don't know. We'll see. So why am I here? Well, my boss said to me, you should do a presentation on lying with statistics. You'd be really good with it. So I don't know about you, but, when a manager says something to you like that, I'm thinking one of two things, Either I'm good with statistics, or I'm good with lying. Now, I'll leave you to be the judge of that through this session, but I have been in the industry for quite a long time, but I'll let you be the judge of it. But perhaps a more important question is, why are you here? Because, who the heck comes to a presentation called How to Lie with Statistics? Right? Are you training to become better liars? Have you got a manager that says, you are particularly adept at this kind of thing? You should try and find the dark arts that you can, come back and bring to us and make benefit with us in whatever your organization is. Now, I suspect you're probably a bit like me, which is you've had days and days of LODs and server administration and table calcs, and you just want a bit of, something that maybe is a bit more sort of relaxed, a bit more broad, and hopefully a little more interesting. So the talk was inspired by a couple of my American colleagues who put something together a year or a couple of years back, and they based it on a book that they tell me is common with you guys over here in the US. It's a common sort of grad school book called How to Lie with Statistics. Now, I took that content and updated it because, first of all, I've never read that book, and second of all, the examples that I saw were very much historical ones. They're perfectly relevant today, but they're not necessarily that recent. So I've added in a couple of new things. So a book called The Field Guide to Lies and Statistics, which is more or less exactly the same thing as far as I can tell, but with a few more sort of neuroscience-y kind of things into it. And then I've thrown in the Thinking Fast and Slow, which is a very popular sort of business book with some very popular themes in business at the moment by Daniel Kahneman, who's one of the economists who got the Nobel Prize for lifting the lid on how we make decisions in our everyday life. So this is the agenda. I'm going to ask, what's the problem? Is there a problem? And without sort of giving you spoilers, we're going to have a second part, which then goes on to explain what the problem actually is, how we go about lying with statistics. Then where do we go? And a final summary. So before we start talking about the impact of statistics, let's have a quick word on trust. Because, we have to trust people who perhaps are using the statistics. Some professions are more trusted than others. So Based on a poll or a study that was done in the UK, we're asked which were the trusted professions. So in the UK data, apparently politicians, government ministers, and footballers, so for translation that's soccer players, were considered the least trustworthy. I can kind of get the politicians and government ministers, but I'm not so sure about the footballers. I think at the time they were going through accusations of diving and crying on the football pitch and all that kind of stuff. Then in the middle, we've got ordinary people that are surrounded by civil servants and priests, and actually lawyers do quite well. I was surprised by that. But at the top, we've got nurses, doctors, professors, scientists, that kind of thing. I think there's a couple of interesting points here. The first one is that on the whole, we're actually quite trusting as a species, right? You know, it's more than 50-50. If we meet somebody new, we're going to hopefully trust what they say. We have like professions at the top. I'm not quite sure what they do to gain our trust. And it has been, I've had various discussions that suggest we start off as trusting as children, and actually we lose trust in people and their professions over time. And maybe that nurses and doctors, even though they have proficiency, competency, relevancy, and reliability in their particular domain, they never actually lose our trust. But one of the interesting things is, although we might trust them to do open heart surgery with us, like upon us, or work some magic with our bodies, would we trust them to do something outside of their recognized domain? Would we trust them to drive our taxi to school, take our kids to school, or something like that? Maybe, maybe not. But the fact is that actually the brain doesn't always work it out. Sometimes it kind of gets things confused. It just thinks doctors and nurses are therefore trustworthy, therefore we should accept their opinion regardless of what it might be. So I'm going to see if I can get just a little bit of help today, in the hope that you can, hopefully this will help my presentation go a little bit smoother. So what is the problem? Is there a problem? So what this presentation is not about, it's not about having a go at badly presented data, okay? So this pie chart isn't a lie, right? There's nothing wrong with it. It's terribly presented, it's not very visual. We don't like pie charts around here very often, but it's nothing wrong with it. I'm also not going to get into some kind of philosophical debate about what is or isn't, logically possible. What I'm really talking about are the kind of stats, the figures that you see and feel in everyday life. So, voted #1 presentation. 80% would watch again. 4 out of 5 women would recommend to a friend. These are all good things, good examples of statistics, that the kind of things we might see in the everyday world. But what you should be thinking, or I hope you're thinking, is who said that? Why did they say that? Why has this person decided to show that to me today? These things that I've just shown you, they're completely ungrounded, completely unreferenced, and these are the things that we need to be looking out for. And sometimes these things can have a massive effect. So I've stuck with a little bit of British politics, because I didn't want to touch the murky waters of American politics, for fear of upsetting people. But we're going through something called Brexit. You probably have heard about it. It's the idea that Britain is going to leave the European Union. We voted on it 2 years ago, and actually we're about to leave in maybe a few months' time. And this was one of the parts of the campaign that was announced. Basically, it said, if we leave Europe, we will get a lot of money that we can spend on the NHS. For those of you who don't know England, NHS means the National Health Service. It's our kind of healthcare, our free healthcare that we have. So this is a very sort of tempting prospect. Let's get out of Europe, let's get lots of money, and let's fund our healthcare even more than we had before. Problem was, it wasn't true. Or at least it was particularly misleading. Don't worry, guys at the back, I don't expect you to be able to read this. The point is that we have even senior authorities within the UK, people who their job is to look at statistics, and they say that actually this 350 million is a confusion and it's a misuse. But it didn't matter. It's a Pandora's box. The figure is out there. We spent days, weeks, months even talking about this figure. And even though it's been disproved, it's still been talked about, right? Once it's out there, we do have a problem. But also, we often don't notice that we're being lied to. So I've got an example here where, well, actually, I'll just take that back. Who likes chocolate? Yeah? Okay. Who likes the idea that you could lose weight by eating more chocolate? Okay, so this is a real piece of meat. I've taken these stories. These were not just the UK-based, you've got the Huffington Post up there, but the others are UK-based online newspapers who took some scientific evidence that you can lose weight by eating chocolate. It's a story I'm going to come back to later on. Okay, so remember that. I don't think you'll forget it, because the thought of it is too good. Chocolate, losing weight. So, how do we lie with stats? Let's get to like sort of the home territory of Tableau, visualizations. So visual analytics takes advantage of our visual systems, brilliant ability to spot patterns, outliers, quickly and easily and unconsciously, using these things called pre-attentive visual attributes. So we can spot color, size, and shape just, really quickly, and we do it we do it at an unconscious level. So if data is presented in a certain way, we'll try and spot a pattern, we'll make an inference that actually the conscious mind doesn't necessarily take into account. It's a great asset when searching for patterns in data, but it's also open to misuse. So if you know that, you can start presenting data in different ways such that you can take advantage of it. Take this, for instance, an advert from you guys in the States. The car, the Verna, I think it's from a few years back. We don't have the Verna in the UK, but we've got a lovely pie chart here. Fantastic. It's the #1 undisputed king in its particular segment. We've got a nice shiny pie chart, 3D this time, showing that it is the best. What the marketer wants you to know is that there's basically no other car in this segment that you should even consider. And whilst we normally talk about pies in sometimes a negative manner to say, well, it's hard to assess the relative size versus other slices in the pie, what we have here is an even more sort of misuse of the visual realm. Because what we're doing is, by making it three-dimensional, we're actually hiding the slices behind it. So it's not even we can't compare it, it's actually hiding the representation of the data of the other particular segments. Now, there's no doubt in my mind that Verna is the #1, it is the biggest segment. But it's a very clever piece of marketing that has just made that almost, the choice is almost unarguable if you look at the picture on the right-hand side, left-hand side, sorry. But it's not just those marketers, of which we may have some in the room. Hello, if you're there. Presumably you know who this guy is, Tim Cook, right, Apple? So he's not alone, he's not adverse to doing a little bit of lying statistics either. So he presented this to the Apple conference, I think, in 2018, a beautiful swooshing blue curve. It's the kind of thing that businessmen, it's their wet dream, isn't it? It's something just going from the bottom to the top, and it's just increasing and increasing. And it's lovely and smooth, and it's lovely and beautiful, and lovely color-coded. Thing is, when you start looking at the underlying data, it's actually very hard to replicate that curve. First of all, this is the data, right? Doesn't quite swoosh, it hasn't quite got the panache of what he showed there, but it is clearly going from left to right. This is iPad sales, by the way. I should have put that context out there. He showed this as iPad sales at the Apple conference. Now, when you look at the data itself, we then realize that actually this is cumulative sales. So it's not a lie to say that is the data, but actually this is more like the data. Okay, these are actual sales over time. And not surprisingly, we have seasonality. We have peaks and troughs. People buy at Christmas and sales and all that kind of period, and it drops off at other times. So it's a bit jaggedy. So let's give Tim Cook the benefit of the doubt. Let's see if we can make it a little smoother and a little more swooshy. Let's add something like a smooth it with a moving average. Story's still not looking great, right? We've got this, over time, iPad sales initially sort of rocketed up, and at the moment now it's kind of, at this time it kind of leveled off, and in fact, it's perhaps decreasing. In fact, has probably continued to decrease. I just didn't have the data for more recent periods, or I should say, I wanted to compare it to the original chart, which is what I've got here. So this is the same data, but which did Tim choose to present in front of a conference? Well, he's not stupid, right? You present the one that he did. But the reality is the one that I've got on the left-hand side is the real data. But what this is trying to point out is that actually the picture always wins. Okay? People just look at the slides, they'll look at the charts, and actually, they'll just see it and go, oh, that looks nice. That's good. We like that. And it's dangerous, right? That's where visualization gets into a sort of dangerous kind of area, because the unconscious brain interprets a picture first before the sort of message gets sort of laid on top of it by the conscious part of your brain. So let's move on to talking about our wonderful brain. So what Kahneman and his colleague, I think it was Dan Ariely, actually did was a series of ingenious experiments in the sort of 70s and 80s, I think. But what they really showed was something that kind of has been around forever, from like mythology to historical stories to Freud to Jung and Skinner. There's always been this concept that there's kind of two parts of the brain, the sort of unconscious to the conscious side. Kahneman actually split it into System 1 and System 2 thinking, where System 1 is just unconscious, fast thinking, whereas System 2 is the thing that gets engaged when we're trying to be more logical, usually when we're a lot more relaxed, when we're sort of chilled and laid back. Now, the thing is, System 1 is actually where we do most of our decisioning. It's the thing that rules out, you know, it's the thing that stopped us from getting eaten by lions and tigers sort of 100,000 years ago. And it would be an injustice to say that the caveman is not smart, okay? The caveman is actually extremely smart. It makes those quick decisions. But the thing is, it's always trying to make those quick decisions. It's trying to get you in and out of bad or unusual situations that you might have gotten yourself into. System 2 is much slower, much more sort of conscious in its thinking. But you've really got to engage that to make it work. So I'm going to give you a classic example from psychology. This is around about the 1980s. I'm going to make two statements about Linda. I'm going to read this comment out, and I'm going to ask you to vote which one is more likely to be true, okay? So Linda, 31 years old and single. She's outspoken and very bright. She majored in philosophy, and as a student, she was deeply concerned with issues of discrimination and social justice, and also participated in anti-nuclear demonstrations. Which is more probable? I'm not going to give you much time on this. Is she more likely to be 1, a bank teller, or more likely 2, a bank teller and is active in the feminist movement? Okay, hands up for those who think number 1 is more likely. Okay, hands up for those who think number 2 is more likely. Actually, it's a pretty even spread. So, what they found was that actually 80% of people in a normal test, obviously you're quite educated, I don't know, will select number 2. But number 2 is not the right answer. Number 1 is. The reason for that is, well, if we get to it, it's something called conditional probability, which is something we as humans are not particularly strong at. But if I try and explain it, number 1 has to be true before number 2 can be true. So therefore, number 1 has to be more likely. But actually, whether you got it right or wrong isn't really the relevant thing here. What I'm trying to show is that your unconscious, your caveman brain, is looking to make associations. So regardless of whether you sort of thought about it and considered the statements, what it did was look at the words on the screen and try and make associations and then go, somebody's asked me to put my hand up. You know, I'm stressed. I need to make a decision. What am I going to do? And that caveman takes over. And so you don't necessarily make what is either the logical calculation, or actually you just try and make the quickest association that you can. Now, admittedly, there isn't a statistic in there. But what I'm trying to highlight is that context is so important with whatever information you're putting in front of people. Okay? So I'm going to introduce you to biases. It's a very common topic nowadays. These are my 2 favorite biases that I talk about, use, or I think influences on a regular basis. Very popular to talk about biases nowadays. I was trying to buy myself a shaver, a razor, I guess you call it over here, and I did it on Father's Day. Because I knew there was going to be some deals. Any men in the audience probably know the best time to buy a razor is going to be Father's Day, Christmas, what is it, Black Friday, is it Black Monday, your sales day, whatever you have over here. You know, those are the best times to go out looking for bargains. Don't buy it the rest of the time of the year. The thing is, we're in the minority if you men go out shopping at that time, because this isn't targeted at men. This is targeted at the spouses of the man, or little Johnny and Jill, who are going to buy the present for the father, right? So when I go onto my website and I was looking for the bargains, guess what they showed me? This is a very popular website in the UK. Sorted by best match, it showed me razors that were starting at £300. These were top of the range, okay? What that's actually doing is, despite, Jack and Jill, or the mother, they don't know what to spend on a razor, but they probably went in thinking, right, I'm going to spend about $100 on my husband. He probably deserves it. He's been working hard. Let's get him a present. But as soon as they see this, even if they only think they're going to spend $100, they see, oh, 300. Oh, I'm anchored. Maybe I should be spending a little more than I thought that I was going to spend before. And that's what they're doing. They're trying to anchor your thought process, your caveman, to say, actually, you should just spend a little bit more. Go on, your husband's worth it. Your father's been working hard. Give him that extra bit of a, extra super duper razor. And what happens is that unconsciously, you tend to just end up paying for something much more expensive than you originally thought. I mean, who here has had that experience where you've walked out of the showroom and then just thought to yourself, what did I just do? How did I just buy that? I can't believe I've just paid that much money for this thing that I'm now carrying, and you're too embarrassed to go back into the shop and change it, right? That's called buyer's remorse, but that again is your caveman acting over on top of, you've just been anchored or led astray by your unconscious brain. So cavey wins. So the second bias I like to talk about is framing. Framing is relatively simple. It's just basically given a statistic or a figure, what context you choose to put it in the situation, whether it be visual or a language. So here's a positive frame. Okay, we've got a product has been proven effective in 80% of cases, 75% lean meat, 9 out of 10 customers fully satisfied. These are all things that make you feel relatively positive about the statistic that's been shown. And if somebody's trying to get you to do something, being very positive about it is something that the caveman is likely to go with, because it's like, I'm not being stressed. There are no lions and tigers here. I can relax, and maybe this is something I should look into. But then you present the same figures. These are exactly the same figures, right? But I'm just presenting it in a different way. The product has failed to work on 2 out of every 10 cases. This product contains 25% fat meat. How does that make you feel, right? Don't think about the numbers. How does it make you feel? It's exactly the same figures, but it makes you feel, ooh, no, I don't want to do this. I don't want to change. I don't want to, do whatever it is I'm supposed to do. And these kind of things, this sort of positivity to encourage people to make changes, or fear to make people want to hold on and stay where they are, these are big things when you start presenting numbers. Actually, I'll go back a step. Think about the last time you did actually go to the doctors. Think about the language they use. They will have been talking about, survival rates, positive things, the chance, there's no chance of this operation failing, or, it's limited, or whatever it might be. They're very trained now to try, well, certainly in the UK, and I assume, because I think your health system's probably better in some ways than ours, they're very trained at trying to make it very positive for you to take part, to actually go ahead with whatever the procedure is that they're suggesting you do. So we'll get onto something slightly more tricky. We're going to go into calculations, and we're going to get a little bit more audience participation, which is tough. It's the 3rd day of the conference. You're all tired. You're nearly, getting worn out. But we're going to talk about means and medians very quickly. The mean, everybody should know, I hope, is the standard way that we talk about averages with data. It's you take, say, the sum of sales, and you divide it by the number of records. The median is the midpoint of your data. So if you rank your data, if you line it all up, the midpoint is the bit right in the middle. Okay? Now, if I asked you guys and girls in the audience, what's the... actually, what I should say is, I believe, and I think this is the case, that the caveman tends to understand this concept. It understands the idea that there is what we call a normal distribution, if you remember it from your statistical, from your high school classes. But it's very simply, we expect a lot of things in the middle and not so much at the edges, right? So if, for instance, I asked you all if somehow I could assess you all, how good you are at driving, perhaps. Maybe I could put on a 10-point scale whether I think gentleman's here good, or you're good, or whatever it might be. What we'd end up with is probably a good spread of data. Some of you would be really good drivers, some of you would be really bad drivers, and there'd be an awful lot of people in the middle. But that's not the way real-world data is, right? Most of the real-world data is skewed in some way or another. So let me rephrase that question, and I want you to put your hands up in the air. Who here thinks they are worse than average drivers? Okay, we've got a few honest people in the audience, or at least people who understand the question. That's made skewed data, right? Because 50% of you are more than likely to be worse than average drivers, right? Everybody thinks they're not, right? But you have to be, right? Somebody has to be bad, but nobody admits to it. Typical situation where you get skewed data, and you know what? Cavey's not going to spot that. Because KV doesn't really get like what's going on, but you have to sit there and think about, well, actually, yeah, people won't necessarily admit to it. They're in a public place. I've asked them to put their hand up about something that they might not be very proud of, or whatever it might be. So, something to be aware of. Skewed data is all around us, and we can only think about, we really need to think about it. KV doesn't notice it. So the other thing about the mean and the median is the median is great for hiding inequalities. So basically things that are at the end of the distribution. Whereas the mean is great for making things seem better or worse if you have inequality in the data. So let's try and put this into context. I ask you what your salary is. I don't know what it is. Let's just put a figure out there. Let's say the average salary in this room is $40,000, okay? Mean and median. So it's got nicely, normally distributed, we think it's 40,000. Now let's say we get 2 people coming in the room. However, these 2 people are these 2. Probably recognize Jeff Bezos, Bill Gates. They're reasonably rich, okay? What that means is actually the median doesn't change that much because we're still, you know, the same number of people plus 2. The middle's still like in the middle. And, you know, it still broadly represents who we are. We still earn approximately about $40,000. But you look at the mean, if you think about the distribution, so you've got the mean sort of here, and maybe, you know, all of us here. These guys, they're not even here, right? They're sort of over here on the distribution. They're making it look like that we have a mean distribution of salary that's the equivalent to like a third world country, like the GDP of, I don't know, Ethiopia or something like that. It's not the case, right? We're not all that rich, but they've managed to skew it. So depending on what your message is, you will pick one or other of these metrics, perhaps, when trying to describe your data. Now, if we stick with salaries, here's a question. What's the average increase of salary over 2 periods of plus 100% and minus 50%? So one period, I get an increase, next period, I get a decrease. I'll give you 3 values, 50%, 25%, or 0%. And I want quick answers. Who thinks 50? Who thinks 25? Who thinks 0? Ah, you're good, aren't you? Surprisingly alert for a Thursday. Okay, so the fact is that this is the kind of thing that actually most people, or at least KV in our brain, will get wrong. Because rather than doing the calculation, particularly, you know, there are some people who aren't that good at maths, but whether you are or aren't is irrelevant. You can very quickly make an association between, say, the 100% and the minus 50, and then come up with some kind of calculation. The 50 maybe is you know, one minus the other. The 25 is maybe taking into account the 100 minus 50. You realize there's a big spread, and you take the bit in the middle. But it's only when you appreciate the context of the data, i.e. we start with $40,000, we double it, we get a 100% increase to $80,000, we then take 50% away, which takes us back to our original 40. It might seem simple, but it's this kind of percentages and context that KV really doesn't understand very well. Okay, slightly tough one, although, yeah, we'll see where it goes. You've got £10,000 on a credit card with 20% APR. Okay. How long or how much time before it doubles, assuming you never pay anything back? And then the same question again, how long before it quadruples? Now, again, KV is going to think something like the blue line here. KV is going to think that actually, 20%, that's a fifth, okay, it'll probably take me 5 years to pay it back, okay, yeah, quadruples, okay, it'll probably be about 10 years. Well, it's not. We've got something called compound interest, right? Actually, the person will have doubled the amount that they owe within about a 4-year period. It will have quadrupled in just under an 8-year period. Again, this is the kind of thing that KV doesn't cope with very well. Okay, you've really got to engage you know, your logical system 2 thinking to make this thing work. So I'll take a breath. I don't know whether you use this phrase over here. It's not very commonly used in English. It's like an old English phrase called a pig in a poke. Anybody heard of it? Pig in a poke? Okay, it's similar, or some people say that it's derived or similar to an old French saying, which is to let the cat out of the bag. Pig in a poke is basically a sack. What used to happen in mid-England, Middle England in the old days, like we're talking the Middle Ages, farmers would take their wares to the market, they'd take pigs in sacks, and as people came along, they'd say, right, I need some meat. Okay, we really need some high protein for our diet. I've been working out, you know, pressing stuff, I need some protein. The farmer goes, look, I've got this lovely pig in this poke, okay? Do you want to buy it? And you go, yes, I do, okay? He then quickly sort of goes, well, that's that pig, and then here's a sack that I've made for you earlier. And the bad thing is, you then go home with that sack that you've not unopened. Typically, or the story goes that actually it was often swapped for other things, meat of less value, potentially cats and dogs, hence the phrase of letting the cat out the bag when you open the bag. There's some dispute about that actual, whether that's totally true, but that's what they do. The point I'm trying to make is that just because you see it, just because it looks good, doesn't necessarily mean that it is good, okay? It doesn't mean that that's what you're going to end up with. So this is an example where there's this guy called Jeremy Hunt. He is now our foreign secretary, but at the time he was our health secretary. And he announced, he was having a discussion about salaries in the UK. The doctors and nurses wanted more money. He obviously didn't want to give them more money. He wasn't necessarily winning the war in the media, because most people were on the side of the doctors and nurses. So whilst in negotiations, he tweets this. I mean, who would do that? What kind of politician would tweet in the middle of a negotiation? But he points out that there is, these hardworking souls are going to receive 6.5 to 29% increase for the NHS who've worked so hard. Great numbers, isn't that fantastic? The fact of the matter is, though, that, well, ignoring the fact that the 6.5 is actually wrong, the lowest they could get was about 4.9, for the majority of the working staff, this was not an improved deal. The most of them would get about 6.5. The only way you could get 29% is if, in a particular profession, a particular role in the NHS, you did as much as you could, you got promoted, you did as much as you could again, you got promoted, and as much as you could again, and got promoted in a 3-year period. Then you might get 29%, which might sound nice if you're a doctor or a nurse, but actually no. This was for estate managers or some kind of administrative office, and nothing to do with the vast majority of workers who are demanding like a kind of pay rise. So obviously you see this tweet, and potentially the general public go, this is a fantastic deal. That Jeremy Hunt, he's actually not that bad at all. But he's sold one, right? He has sold a pup, he has sold a pig in a poke. It looks too good, but it isn't. When you get down to it, it's not good at all. Enough to upset KV once he's realised what's actually happened. So now we get on to perhaps a bigger area of data collection. I'm going to check out you guys in the audience. I tried to think, well, what's the way I can get you guys head around some of these things? Surveys. We all know about surveys. We get loads of them. And we probably know about sports. I thought I'd be onto a winner there. So question is, who is this guy? Doug Peterson. Okay, so I had to look it up. I didn't know. So Doug Peterson is the coach of the Philadelphia Eagles who won the Super Bowl last year. Okay? So imagine he's in the middle of the Super Bowl. His team are whatever the state is. But whatever happens, he has a crisis of confidence. He suddenly doesn't know what to do next. He's thinking, what should my next play be? Perhaps he's magical as well. He has the ability to freeze time. So rather than actually going through with the play, he decides to send out a survey saying, what should my next play be? The challenge for you is, who does he ask? Who does he send out that survey to? Because he could send it out to his defensive coaches, his attacking coaches, maybe the people who are on the pitch currently, maybe the people who actually aren't on the pitch, who want to get in the game. He could send it to the commentators. He could send it to the Patriot fans who are playing Patriots, I think, yeah? Either way, the answers he gets back are not necessarily going to be good ones, right? They're neither going to be qualified, because maybe he's just asking people who know nothing about football, or B, he's asking people who perhaps have other things, other motives. So maybe that's not such a good idea. And while he's still got time stopped, he decides to ask, well, I might as well ask a few more questions because I've got their attention. So maybe he says, well, while I'm here, do you think Nick Foles, who was the quarterback in the game, I understand, is he too short to play? Maybe I should swap him out for somebody else. Well, that's bad, right? Because you're leading the audience, you're leading whoever's taken the survey to think that he is too short. Not saying, should he be quarterback? It's like, is he too short? Yeah, he's short. It sounds short, doesn't he? He's short, he must be. Does he miss too many chances to be my main quarterback or the person I need to be looking to? Does he enjoy drinking beer? We don't even know whether he does drink beer, but there could be something here that would, it's a loaded question. Or do you believe that Nick Foles always gives 110%? Well, it's jargon, it's lacking clarity. You don't really know how people are going to respond because they don't really understand what you're asking. What does that really mean? Also with data collection, we have confidence in data. So over in the UK with a program called Dragon's Den, I know you have a program called Shark Tank because the guy referenced it in his presentation this morning. I saw that and thought, yes, I'm on zeitgeist, or whatever the phrase might be. You always, when looking at data or you're going through a collection of data, you always have to ask, what am I not being told? What is the data that I don't have? So how many of you watched this program and seen a situation where they might say, look, I have this company, I've got this great new thing, I value it at $100 million. You know, in 2 years' time, we're going to be selling 500,000 units, and it's going to make you a fortune. Okay? I've certainly seen that happen. But then when the sharks dig into it, they suddenly found out that this gentleman or lady has actually only sold, well, maybe 50 units. Maybe they've sold 100, but they haven't sold very many. And suddenly they're making these big assumptions about what they're going to do in the future. And it's up to the sharks to ask or to find out what the real truth is. Well, they're not necessarily being misleading, but what they're doing is something called extrapolation. They're taking essentially a data set that is potentially very small, but certainly 50 units is not the same as 500,000, okay? They're sort of saying, we'll take this data over here and we'll apply it to what's going to happen in the future to everybody over there. That kind of thing is extrapolation, and that's not good when collecting data or making assumptions about data. Other thing about data collection, it's worth noting correlations happen all the time. So, people have probably seen this kind of example. We can correlate ice cream or ice cream eating with shark attacks. It can be done, right? They are correlated. Actually, they are connected by something I think is called a confounding variable. What that means is that most shark attacks actually happen in the summer. Guess what? That's when we eat ice creams. So guess what? Ice creams are associated with shark attacks. Yeah, easily done. Now, this is actually the point where most people who are perhaps not so big in stats sort of do that kind of thing, go, oh, correlation doesn't equal causation. It's like the phrase that everybody throws out. But that's a little unfair, right? Because, yeah, they're right. But what does, it's actually very hard to prove causation. The thing is that correlations do happen all the time, and you do have to be aware of them. But you have to always just think, well, does this make sense? And take a correlation perhaps a little further and to ask for more questions about the data source. So it's not that you should ignore them, it's just that you shouldn't sort of leap to some amazing conclusion. And this is quite relevant for when you're really talking about sort of big data, because actually, as I say, the more data you get, the more likely you are to have spurious or weird correlations. And for those of you in the audience who are sitting there smugly, because you just tried to find a nice dark place to sit while you didn't have to listen to LODs and all that kind of stuff, these 2 points of extrapolation and bias are just as problematic in AI, if not more so, okay? If you're sitting there thinking, well, I don't care, I've got this really clever algorithm, it'll sort it out. Or maybe you're not. Maybe that's somebody in your organization, but you trust them. You believe in the hype that's currently going around that AI and machine learning will solve everything, okay? But it actually impacts these machine learning algorithms just as much as it impacts us in the way that we interpret data, extrapolation and bias. So you take an example like this from the summer. The Amazon facial recognition tool misclassified, I think, some senators or members of Congress as criminals. Nice. This is actually a software that's used, I understand, in certain states in the US by the various police forces. Same time during the summer, Microsoft released a new version of its previously accused racist and sexist software. And I think somebody must have then had a word in marketing and said, actually, maybe we should steer clear of this, because then the president released a thing saying, you know what, this facial recognition technology, maybe we should have some regulation around it, because maybe we're not as confident as we were. And then you've got the likes of Google, who have been around for a while, and even they say, you know what, this stuff is tricky. It's not as easy as you think, okay? And their main problems are those that I mentioned before, extrapolation and bias. So there's no magic for this, okay? There's no stepping around it. You have to be aware that these things happen in data. And you have to be aware that the current theme and trend for AI solving everything could be a pig in a poke, okay? It sounds good, but when you get home, you may be letting the cat out of the bag. So, where do we go from here? Well, statistics in the media generally looks like this. So and even in the sort of the most data-driven organizations, you have a narrative. Somebody has an opinion. You know, you get that hippo situation, the highest paid person's opinion in the room, or whatever it might be. They want to prove something, so they go out, they find the data, and guess what? They can prove it. It's not that difficult. Data science and big world data, they're just as bad, but in the other way around. They say, let's assemble your data, and then we'll work out stories from it. You know, we've been through this like for decades, right? From the 80s of people saying, buy a data warehouse, build a 360 view of your customer, whatever it might be, assemble your data, build it and they will come. You build it and we will find out the truths that are out there. It's simple, but it's not the way it works, because that's where you get this kind of thing. Going back to the chocolate, right? Chocolate and it losing weight. There was a gentleman, just a journalist. Didn't have anything to do with nutrition, doesn't know anything about that. He did a study where he added a GP, a general practitioner or doctor, to add a bit of authenticity to it. He went out, did a study of 5 men, 11 women, got them, recruited them via Facebook for money. He then just basically collected a load of data and then looked for any correlations that might seem like really cool. Okay, and he just happened to, he struck gold. He happened to find out that when they did the first survey and a second survey, and in comparing over time, he found that those that ate chocolate, they lost weight. Great. So this gentleman then pays some money to have this published in a journal, which then gets picked up by other journals, which then gets picked up by the media. So even though it is scientific, it was a scientific study. There's a p-value. Everybody likes p-values who like stats in here, okay? Yeah, let's do a p-value. There was no p-hacking, as they call it. Basically, it was a valid study with valid science, but completely invalid data, right? He was just going out to try and make the point that the media will pick up on any story that looks good. And potentially, somebody at some point, at any chain in that reasoning could have said, this looks too good to be true, but nobody checked it, right? Yeah. That's where that story comes from. So where statistics really add value is really the scientific method. They add value in the context of the hypothesis or the idea that you're trying out. And actually, you've got to put your ideas and your beliefs out there, then assemble your data. Okay, admittedly, that might be in your data warehouse or your data lake or whatever it might be, but you don't get the insight from your data. You get the insight from testing or your understanding of the data. You then test the hell out of it, and most importantly, you peer review. You pass your findings to other people so that they can check it and see whether it makes sense or not. And then you build the narrative from that. And that's actually where Tableau adds the most impact, covering this whole area. It helps you define with your hypotheses and your beliefs. And then for me, it's the ability to actually share the information with your colleagues. So, just go on a quick sort of Tableau journey here. It allows you to do sharing and collaboration with people via the server, okay? With the idea that you're going to get as many eyeballs on the problem as you can. You can also use the eyeballs or the frequency with which people view things as a guidance of what the truth might be. You'll actually find that perhaps data sources or visualizations that are more trusted are probably more viewed, or vice versa. They become more trusted because they are more viewed, because people will spot any errors that might have occurred. Similarly, we take advantage of the wisdom of the crowds by saying if data sources are commonly used, then maybe they have some validity, and push those to you guys as part of the recommendation engine that we have. Also, when doing certification of data sources, at the very least, we are providing references, a throat to choke if we think that the data is wrong, okay? That the visualizations just haven't just been magicked out of nowhere, or the data just hasn't appeared. If you find a problem, you can go to this person, whoever it is, to check or to say, you know what, that doesn't quite look right. So if you've got a tool that's about analysis or about data, you've got to be having this kind of referenceability there. Also, obviously, we all know this, you can get dirty with the data, you can get hands-on. Again, this is just allowing people to allowing more eyeballs to get on the problem, to find out whether the data you have actually is good, bad, or indifferent. And then again, there are those users who perhaps aren't that scientific, but they kind of know the business. Just having them able to comment on the stuff that you produce is really important. Having them being able to sort of lay down their opinions of whether something looks right or not is actually quite valuable, because often you get too stuck in the data and perhaps not stuck enough in the business and what's actually a rational answer. It allows everybody in your organization to apply their system to thinking, to encapsulate their inner Einstein. So, in summary, what I'm trying to say is that we are the problem, not the math, okay? I say maths, but you say math. Potato, potato, whatever it is. I want you to take responsibility when looking at the figures that are around you. It's important to know that the caveman is always there, okay? That first feeling you have about a figure, just move beyond it. Don't just accept a figure that you see for the sake of it. If you're providing figures for other people, always try and add context, good, appropriate context to your numbers. Don't just leave it hanging. And also provide referenceability, right? Actually say where that number comes from. What does it mean? You know, what's the data source? Give it reference. But most important of all, you've got to try and democratize the process for fact checking. You've actually got to open up and help others check facts for you by providing this sort of referenceability, getting eyeballs on it, getting them to look at the data. Because there's going to be the data's never like 100% accurate, right? It's always changing as well, and you just need a lot of people always looking at these things to make it better. Oh, but if you've come here with the intention of, gaining powers in the dark side, as it were, hopefully you've learned that what you will need to do is you show things too good to be true, you don't back up your claims with references, you use terrible visuals, you confuse people with percentages because they're not strong at that, you extrapolate, you use ridiculously small samples and then just apply it to everything, and you use slanted questions or poor data collection to make things happen. And of course you do dress up in a doctor's coat. So hopefully with that, you've understood a little bit more about how statistics affects our decision-making, or perhaps how our decision-making can be influenced by things apart from the statistics, and that you should be engaging with the numbers all around us. And with that, I do actually have a final coda, and that is that you should always stay alert for manipulation. And that, there are hundreds of thousands of customers who love Tableau. And with that, I'd like you to complete the survey. Thank you for your time today. Enjoy the session.